Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you love true horror stories, forgotten legends, terrifying folklore, and the kind of nightmares that linger long after the lights go out, then you've come to the right place. Tonight's story takes us deep into the heart of Appalachia, where generations of miners whispered about strange creatures known only as the Knockers. Most believed they were harmless spirits, small beings that tapped on the stone walls to warn miners before cave-ins. Some even thanked them for saving lives. But there was another story. One that old miners refused to tell. Because according to those who disappeared beneath Black Mountain, the knocking wasn't always a warning. Sometimes, it was an invitation. So dim the lights, settle in, and remember. If you ever hear knocking from inside solid rock, never answer. Black Mountain rose above the forests of eastern Kentucky like an ancient giant that had long since fallen asleep. Its peaks disappeared into low clouds almost every morning, while dense pine trees covered its slopes so completely that sunlight rarely reached the forest floor. The mountain looked peaceful from a distance, but everyone living nearby understood a simple truth. Black Mountain was alive. Not alive the way animals or people were alive, but in another sense. It groaned during winter nights without any wind. It sighed after heavy rain. Sometimes, when dawn broke over the valley, strange echoes drifted through the woods as though enormous lungs were breathing beneath miles of solid stone. The locals never questioned it. Their grandparents had heard those sounds. Their parents had heard them. Now it was simply another part of life. The mines scattered throughout the mountain had provided work for nearly 2 centuries. Thousands of men had descended into the darkness seeking coal, and hundreds had never returned. Official records blamed collapsing tunnels, poisonous gas, floods, and explosions. Old miners blamed something else. Every newcomer eventually heard the same warning. If you hear 3 knocks from inside the wall, walk away. Most laughed. Until they heard them themselves. Daniel Mercer had never believed in mountain legends. At 34 years old, he had worked mines across West Virginia and Kentucky for over a decade. He trusted steel supports, geological surveys, and engineering reports, not ghost stories told over cheap whiskey. His father had died in a mine collapse when Daniel was only 11. Since then, he'd sworn he would never let fear control him. Fear killed miners faster than darkness ever could. So when the Black Ridge Mining Company offered double pay for experienced workers willing to reopen Shaft 12 beneath Black Mountain, Daniel accepted without hesitation. The company called it an abandoned tunnel. The locals called it the Forgotten Mouth. That difference should have mattered. But Daniel only cared about the paycheck. The economy had collapsed in nearby towns. His wife, Claire, needed expensive medical treatment. Their daughter Emily dreamed of attending college one day. Money mattered. Ghost stories did not. The first warning came before Daniel even entered the mine. An old man sat alone outside the equipment shed, sharpening a rusted pickaxe with slow, deliberate movements. His face looked older than the mountain itself. Deep scars crossed his hands like faded rivers, and one of his eyes had turned completely white years ago. He introduced himself simply as Elias. Retired. 47 years underground. Daniel nodded politely. You worked this shaft? Elias stopped sharpening. I survived this shaft. There was a difference. Daniel smiled awkwardly. I've heard all the stories. No. The old man looked directly into his eyes. You've heard the ones people are willing to repeat. For several long seconds neither man spoke. Only the wind moved between them. Finally, Elias reached into his jacket and pulled out a tiny object wrapped in dirty cloth. Inside rested an old silver coin blackened by age. Carry this. Daniel frowned. For luck? The old miner slowly shook his head. No. For silence. Daniel laughed. You really believe in all that? Elias didn't smile. I stopped believing 50 years ago. What changed? The old man's remaining eye drifted toward Black Mountain. It answered me. Shaft 12 descended nearly half a mile beneath the mountain before splitting into a maze of forgotten tunnels. Modern equipment illuminated wide sections of the mine, but beyond the floodlights waited complete darkness. Not ordinary darkness. Ancient darkness. The kind that had existed for millions of years before human beings ever walked the earth. Daniel noticed something immediately. The walls were unusually smooth. Coal veins normally left jagged textures throughout the tunnels, but here the stone looked polished, almost melted. As if enormous hands had rubbed against it countless times. One of the younger miners noticed it too. Looks strange. Another shrugged. Maybe water. Daniel wasn't convinced. There wasn't enough moisture underground to shape solid rock like this. Still, there had to be a natural explanation. There always was. By lunchtime, everyone had settled into routine. Drills screamed. Machines thundered. Dust floated through the artificial lights like gray snow. Then, everything stopped. Not because someone gave an order. Because every machine shut down simultaneously. The silence felt unnatural. No engines. No drilling. No voices. Only, knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed somewhere inside the eastern wall. 3 slow taps. Perfectly spaced. Every miner froze. No one moved. Daniel looked toward the others. Their faces had turned pale. One man quietly removed his helmet. Another crossed himself. Nobody spoke. Then the knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, closer. It sounded less like stone striking stone. More like knuckles. Human knuckles. Rapped gently against solid rock. One of the foremen whispered without looking away. Everybody back. Nobody argued. They simply obeyed. Daniel stayed where he was. There has to be someone trapped. The foreman grabbed his shoulder. There isn't. We should check. There isn't. His voice cracked with genuine fear. There hasn't been another tunnel behind that wall in 86 years. Daniel frowned. Then what's making the sound? Nobody answered. Because the knocking had already begun again. Only this time. It came from behind Daniel. He spun around. Nothing. Just empty tunnel. Darkness. Stone. Then, knock. A single tap. Directly beside his ear. He jerked backward. The wall was solid. Cold. Unbroken. But for one impossible moment. He could have sworn he felt something on the opposite side. Not trapped. Waiting. That evening, Daniel laughed about the incident back at camp. Most of the crew didn't. Several older miners packed their belongings before sunrise. None returned. Management dismissed them as superstitious fools and hired replacements within days. Business continued. Deadlines remained. Coal still needed extracting. Daniel almost forgot about the knocking. Almost. Until Emily called him. Dad? Hey, sweetheart. I had another nightmare. Daniel smiled gently. You watching scary movies again? No. She hesitated. I dreamed someone was knocking under my bed. Daniel's smile faded. What happened? They kept asking me to open the floor. His stomach tightened. What did they say? Emily became unusually quiet. Finally she whispered. They knew your name. Daniel looked toward the dark outline of Black Mountain outside his cabin window. For the first time since arriving. The mountain seemed to be listening. And somewhere beneath thousands of tons of ancient stone. Something knocked. Once. Very softly. As though it knew. Someone had finally heard the invitation. The knock came again just before dawn. Daniel sat upright in his bunk, his heart hammering against his ribs. For several seconds he remained perfectly still, listening to the silence inside the small mining cabin. The room was empty except for the faint hum of an aging heater and the gentle tapping of rain against the window. Then it came once more. Knock. 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 3 slow, deliberate taps. Not against the cabin door. Not against the window. They came from beneath the floorboards. Daniel climbed out of bed and pressed his ear against the wooden floor. Nothing. Only the distant vibration of heavy machinery starting another day beneath Black Mountain. He told himself it had been the pipes. Old cabins made strange noises all the time. Still. He slipped the old silver coin Elias had given him into his pocket before leaving for work. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because, for the first time, he wanted to believe that old man had been wrong. The morning fog clung to the mountain like a funeral veil. As the miners gathered outside the elevator cage, the atmosphere felt different. The usual jokes and laughter were gone. Men avoided looking toward Shaft 12. Some silently muttered prayers before stepping inside the rusted steel lift. Daniel noticed 3 unfamiliar faces replacing the workers who had quit yesterday. Young men. Strong. Confident. Exactly the way he had looked when he first entered a mine years ago. They laughed when another miner mentioned the knocking. "Ghosts don't pay our bills," one of them joked. Nobody laughed with him. Even the elevator operator stared at the ground. The descent seemed longer that morning. The cage groaned as it dropped hundreds of feet into the earth, its cables squealing against ancient pulleys. The temperature fell steadily. Warm air disappeared. Cold moisture filled every breath. The lights overhead flickered once. Then twice. One of the new workers looked upward. Electrical problem? No one answered. When the elevator finally stopped, Daniel stepped onto the tunnel floor and immediately noticed something strange. Fresh footprints. Bare footprints. They crossed the dusty ground in every direction. Small. No larger than a child's. The foreman frowned. "Who came down here before us?" Another worker knelt beside the prints. "There aren't any boot marks. Only tiny human footprints. Leading deeper into abandoned tunnels. Then, simply stopping. As though whoever made them had walked into solid stone." The work resumed despite everyone's unease. Massive drills screamed against layers of coal while loaders carried broken rock toward conveyor belts. Dust coated every surface until the miners looked like gray statues moving through darkness. Daniel tried to ignore the uneasy feeling growing inside him. Focus on work. Forget the stories. Forget Emily's nightmare. Forget the knocking. For nearly 4 hours. Nothing unusual happened. Then every bird inside the ventilation shaft suddenly fell silent. The canaries. Every mine kept them as an early warning for poisonous gas. Normally their songs echoed constantly through the tunnels. Now, nothing. The silence felt heavier than the mountain itself. One miner slowly turned toward the nearest bird cage. The canary stood perfectly still. Not dead. Not sleeping. Simply staring into the darkness beyond the lights. As if watching someone approach. The first scream echoed through the tunnels only seconds later. It belonged to one of the new workers. Everyone dropped their tools and ran. They found him standing alone near Tunnel 8. His flashlight pointed toward an empty wall. "What happened?" the foreman shouted. The young miner couldn't answer. His face had gone completely white. His hands trembled uncontrollably. Finally he whispered. "I thought someone was trapped." "Where?" He pointed toward solid rock. "I heard a little girl crying." The men exchanged nervous glances. "There are no children down here." "I know." His breathing became faster. "She kept asking for help." Daniel stepped closer. "What exactly did she say?" The miner swallowed hard. "She said." He hesitated. "She said she couldn't get out because the mountain wouldn't let her leave." Silence swallowed the tunnel. No one spoke. Because every man standing there had heard the same legend. Never answer voices inside the stone. They never belong to the living. That afternoon the company geologist arrived. Dr. Howard Collins had spent 30 years studying Appalachian rock formations. He dismissed every rumor before even entering the mine. "There are no spirits underground," he said confidently. "Echoes play tricks on exhausted minds." His certainty reassured management. Not the miners. Daniel followed Collins as they examined the eastern wall where the knocking had first appeared. The geologist frowned. "This shouldn't exist." "What?" He pointed at a section of black rock. Coal naturally formed in horizontal layers. Here. The layers curved inward. Perfectly. Like fingerprints pressed into soft clay. Collins ran his hand across the surface. The stone felt warm. Far warmer than the surrounding rock. "That's impossible," he muttered. Then, the wall pushed back? Only slightly. Barely enough to notice. But Daniel felt it too. Like touching the chest of someone taking a slow breath. Both men immediately stepped away. Neither spoke. Because neither could explain what they had just felt. That evening Daniel searched for Elias. He found the old miner sitting beside a dying campfire, carving strange symbols into another silver coin. Without looking up, Elias asked, "So? You heard it?" Daniel sat beside him. "What are the knockers?" The old man stared into the flames for a long time. "When I was young, I believed they were spirits of dead miners. And now? I know they're older than miners." "Older how?" Elias sighed deeply. My grandfather told me that before the first Europeans came here, the Cherokee refused to hunt on Black Mountain. Daniel listened carefully. They believed something slept beneath it. What? They never gave it a name. Why not? Because names attract attention. The fire crackled between them. My grandfather said the mountain wasn't built. It grew. Daniel frowned. Grew? Like a shell. A shell for what? Elias looked toward the dark mountain. For something buried so deep that even God chose to leave it there. That night Daniel couldn't sleep. Emily's frightened voice echoed endlessly inside his thoughts. They knew your name. Around midnight his phone vibrated. A text message. From Claire. Emily's talking in her sleep again. Daniel immediately called. Claire answered in a whisper. I didn't want to wake you. How is she? I don't know. Put me on speaker. Claire quietly entered Emily's bedroom. The little girl remained asleep. But she was speaking. Not dreaming. Speaking. Very slowly. Very clearly. Daniel's blood froze as he listened. Emily wasn't speaking English anymore. The words sounded ancient. Harsh. Almost like stone grinding against stone. Then, she suddenly stopped. A deep voice answered from somewhere inside the room. Not Claire. Not Emily. Something else. One sentence. Perfect English. He is getting closer. The call disconnected. Daniel stared at the dark phone screen. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. The next morning only half the crew returned to Shaft 12. The others simply drove away before sunrise. Management threatened lawsuits. Nobody cared. Daniel almost left with them. Almost. But curiosity had become stronger than fear. He needed answers. The elevator descended once more into the mountain. Only this time. The tunnels were different. Fresh scratch marks covered the walls. Long. Parallel. As though enormous fingers had dragged themselves through solid rock during the night. No mining equipment could have made them. One of the workers quietly whispered. Those weren't here yesterday. Nobody disagreed. Then, without warning, every flashlight flickered. Darkness swallowed the tunnel for less than 2 seconds. When the lights returned, someone new stood at the far end of the passage. A small figure. No taller than 8 years old. Facing away from them. Barefoot. Wearing an old miner's cap. Daniel called out. Hey! The child slowly raised one hand. Not waving. Pointing. Toward a tunnel that had been sealed with concrete nearly 90 years earlier. Then the lights flickered again. 1 second. Darkness. When they came back, the child was gone. Only tiny muddy footprints remained. Leading directly into the sealed wall. And somewhere beyond the concrete, something answered with 3 slow knocks. Knock. 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 The mountain was no longer waiting for someone to hear it. Now. It was guiding them deeper. For several long seconds, no one moved. The 3 knocks echoed through the abandoned passage until they slowly dissolved into the silence. Every miner stood frozen, staring at the concrete wall where the barefoot child had disappeared only moments before. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Finally, one of the younger workers broke the silence. Did everyone see that? No one answered. Because everyone had. The foreman ordered the crew back to work, pretending nothing had happened. His voice sounded firm, but his trembling hands betrayed him. Forget what you saw, he barked. We're here to mine coal, not chase ghost stories. The miners reluctantly returned to their machines. Only Daniel remained standing before the sealed tunnel. Something about the wall bothered him. It wasn't the scratches. It wasn't the footprints. It was the concrete itself. It looked new. Far newer than a wall supposedly built nearly 90 years ago. He brushed away years of black dust with his gloved hand. Beneath the grime appeared faded white lettering. Sealed, October 17, 1938. But beneath that date, someone had carved another message by hand. Not with a knife. With desperate fingernails. Do not open again. Daniel photographed the wall before anyone noticed. That evening, after returning to camp, he searched through every public mining record he could find. Shaft 12 existed. So did the collapse in 1938. According to official reports, 31 miners had died after a methane explosion destroyed the eastern galleries. Recovery teams supposedly sealed the tunnel because it was too unstable to enter. Case closed. Except, Daniel noticed something strange. The names of the 31 victims appeared in every report. But another document listed 32 employees working that exact shift. One name had been removed. Not crossed out. Erased. Every record after 1938 skipped directly from worker number 31 to worker number 33. As though the missing man had never existed. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. Whoever he was, someone had wanted history to forget him. The next morning, Daniel drove into the nearest town instead of reporting directly to the mine. The local library occupied an old brick building that had survived nearly a century. Most people ignored its basement archives. Daniel didn't. Boxes filled with yellowed newspapers stretched across endless shelves coated in dust. Hours passed before he finally found what he was looking for. A newspaper from October 1938. The headline read, "Mine Disaster Claims 31 Lives." But the photograph beneath the article showed something unexpected. 32 miners. Standing together. Daniel counted twice. Then a third time. There was no mistake. 32 men. One of them had been deliberately erased from history. Someone had even scratched his face out of every surviving photograph. Every picture. Except one. In the corner of the image, barely visible, stood a tall miner wearing an old leather cap. His face was blurred. But his eyes reflected light strangely. Almost as if they glowed from inside. Across the back of the photograph someone had handwritten 5 words. He answered the knocking first. Daniel left the library feeling colder than when he entered. Outside, rain had begun falling over the valley. As he walked toward his truck, an elderly woman sitting beneath the porch roof quietly called his name. "Mr. Mercer." Daniel stopped. "I know you." She slowly shook her head. "I knew your father." That caught his attention. "My father never worked here." "No." She smiled sadly. "But Black Mountain knew him." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" The old woman looked toward the mountain hidden behind thick clouds. "It calls the same blood." She introduced herself as Margaret Lawson. Her father had survived the 1938 disaster. "Barely. I was only 6, she said quietly. He never spoke much afterward. "What did he tell you?" Margaret hesitated before answering. "He said the explosion wasn't an accident." Daniel stared at her. "Then what caused it?" "My father believed the company blasted open something that should have remained buried." She reached into an old wooden box beside her chair. Inside lay a weathered leather journal. "My father's." Daniel carefully accepted it. He wanted someone to read this after he died. "He trusted me?" "No." She looked directly into his eyes. "He trusted the man the mountain chose." That night Daniel opened the journal. The pages smelled of coal dust and age. The handwriting became shakier with every entry. October 9, 1938. Something has begun knocking beyond the eastern wall. 3 taps every evening. October 11th. Tom answered by hitting the wall with his pickaxe. The knocking stopped. Tom smiled. None of us did. October 13th. Tom says voices speak to him now. Only underground. Only when he's alone. October 15th. Tom says they know secrets about all of us. They knew my wife's birthday. They knew where I buried my dog when I was 10 years old. Things nobody else could know. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. He turned another page. October 16th. Tom says they aren't trapped. They're trying to get out. The final pages had been stained by something dark. Not ink. Blood. The handwriting shook violently. October 17th. The wall opened. God forgive us. The wall opened by itself. Daniel's breathing slowed. He continued reading. It wasn't a cave. It wasn't another tunnel. It was hollow. Like the inside of a throat. His hands tightened around the journal. Something inside was breathing. Daniel stopped reading. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Then, very softly, 3 knocks echoed from somewhere outside his cabin. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. Rain soaked the empty camp. No one stood outside. No footsteps. No movement. Only darkness. Then another sound. Knock. 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 This time, from beneath the earth. The ground itself vibrated gently under his boots. Daniel slowly looked toward Black Mountain. The mountain answered. A deep groan rolled through the valley. Trees trembled. Loose stones slid downhill. Birds exploded from the forest in panicked flocks despite the darkness. It sounded like something enormous turning over in its sleep. The next day, management announced a major discovery. Ground-penetrating radar had located an empty chamber behind the sealed tunnel, large enough to contain an entire underground cavern. The company celebrated. A new coal deposit meant millions of dollars. Daniel felt sick. The older miners immediately protested. "We're not opening that wall." Management ignored them. Drilling equipment arrived before noon. Huge rotary drills were positioned directly in front of the concrete barrier. One final warning echoed through the tunnel. Elias walked past every supervisor without saying a word. He simply placed the old silver coin on the drill. Then he left. No explanation. No argument. Just the coin. One engineer laughed. "Old fool." He tossed the coin onto the ground. Daniel watched Elias disappear into the elevator without ever looking back. It was the last time anyone saw him. At exactly 2:17 p.m., the drill began cutting through the concrete. The first layer crumbled easily. The second followed. Dust filled the tunnel. Then, the drill struck something beyond the wall. Not rock. Something softer. The machine suddenly stopped. Its steel bit twisted into a knot, as though it had struck rubber instead of stone. The operator stared in disbelief. "What the hell?" Then a low sound emerged from beyond the broken wall. Not knocking. Not breathing. Whispering. Hundreds of voices speaking at once. Too quiet to understand. Yet somehow, every miner instinctively knew. They were being welcomed. One by one. Everyone began hearing different words. One man heard his dead mother calling his name. Another heard his brother, killed years earlier in Afghanistan. Someone else heard his missing wife crying for help. Daniel heard only one voice. "Emily." Softly. "Daddy." His feet moved before his mind could stop them. He walked toward the broken wall. Another step. Another. The whispers grew warmer. Kinder. Almost comforting. Then, a powerful hand grabbed his shoulder. It was the foreman. His face was pale with terror. "Don't listen." Daniel blinked. The voices instantly vanished. He looked around. Nearly half the crew had unknowingly begun walking toward the opening. Their eyes empty. Their expressions peaceful. Like sleepwalkers. Then, something reached out from the darkness beyond the broken wall. Not a hand. Not a claw. Just one impossibly long finger. Made entirely of black stone. It slowly tapped against the edge of the tunnel. Knock. The miners stopped breathing. The finger tapped again. Knock. Then a third time. Knock. The entire mountain answered. Deep beneath their feet, thousands of unseen knocks echoed through the earth. Not dozens. Not hundreds. Thousands. As if an entire city hidden beneath Black Mountain had begun knocking together. Because after nearly 90 years, the door had finally been opened. No one spoke. Thousands of knocks rippled through the mountain like a heartbeat awakening after centuries of silence. The sound surrounded the miners from every direction, above them, beneath them, even inside the walls. It wasn't loud. In fact, each individual knock was almost gentle. But together, they became unbearable. Daniel covered his ears. It made no difference. The knocking wasn't traveling through the air anymore. It was traveling through the stone. Through the steel supports. Through the soles of his boots. Through his bones. Every vibration settled somewhere deep inside his chest, where his own heartbeat struggled to keep its rhythm. Then, the mountain fell silent. Instantly, every echo disappeared. The finger of black stone slowly withdrew into the darkness beyond the broken wall. No footsteps. No movement. Nothing. For several long seconds, everyone simply stared at the opening. The foreman finally found his voice. "Seal it." No one moved. "I said seal it." Still, nobody obeyed. Even the engineers who had laughed only minutes earlier refused to approach the opening. The darkness behind the broken wall no longer looked like an ordinary tunnel. It looked endless. The beams of several flashlights disappeared into it without touching a single wall. It was as though the light itself had been swallowed. Management refused to abandon the discovery. Within 2 hours, executives arrived from the company's headquarters carrying expensive surveying equipment, drones, and laser scanners. Among them was Dr. Evelyn Carter, one of the country's leading geological researchers. Unlike the others, she didn't dismiss the miners' fear. She listened carefully. After hearing every account, she quietly asked one question. Has anyone measured the temperature inside the opening? An engineer aimed a digital thermometer into the darkness. The screen flashed. -12 degrees Fahrenheit. Everyone frowned. That can't be right. Underground temperatures remained relatively stable year-round. Nothing beneath Black Mountain should have been below freezing. Dr. Carter frowned. Take another reading. The engineer repeated the test. This time, the display read 98 degrees Fahrenheit. Several people exchanged confused glances. Again. -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Again. 127 degrees Fahrenheit. The numbers changed every few seconds. Wildly. As though the laws of physics no longer existed beyond the broken wall. Dr. Carter slowly lowered her notebook. I've never seen rock behave like this. Daniel stood beside her. Maybe it isn't rock. She looked at him. You've started believing the stories. I've started believing what I've seen. Neither of them smiled. A small reconnaissance drone was prepared. Equipped with high-powered lights and multiple cameras, it hovered steadily before entering the darkness. Everyone gathered around the monitor. For the first few yards, nothing unusual appeared. Smooth stone walls. Ancient supports. Collapsed debris. Then, the tunnel widened. Far beyond anything shown on old mining maps. The drone entered an enormous underground chamber. Gasps spread through the room. It wasn't a cavern. It was a city. Thousands of towering stone columns stretched into darkness, each carved with symbols unlike any known language. Massive bridges connected impossible cliffs hanging inside the cavern. Staircases climbed into nothingness before disappearing into shadows far above. Buildings. Statues. Roads. Everything carved from black stone. Entire neighborhoods hidden beneath Black Mountain. Older than any civilization history had ever recorded. One engineer whispered, "My God." The drone continued deeper. Its light swept across gigantic statues lining an ancient avenue. Each statue stood nearly 60 feet tall. Their bodies looked vaguely human. But their heads were smooth, featureless. Except for one thing. Every statue pressed a single finger against its lips. Silence. The same gesture. Over, and over, and over again. Dr. Carter quietly wrote one sentence inside her notebook. Warning, or command? Without warning, the drone stopped moving. Its motors still spun. Its lights remained on. Yet something held it perfectly still. The operator checked his controls. I can't move it. The screen flickered. Static briefly covered the image. When it cleared, someone stood directly in front of the camera. Not a statue. Not a miner. A little girl. Barefoot. Covered in coal dust. The same child Daniel had seen 2 days earlier. She smiled. Slowly raised one finger. And pointed upward. The camera tilted toward the ceiling. The lights illuminated something impossible. The roof of the cavern wasn't stone. It was moving. Very slowly. Like thousands of muscles contracting beneath black skin. The operator gasped. What is that? No one answered. Because everyone suddenly understood. The city wasn't beneath the mountain. It was inside something. The screen filled with static. The drone's signal vanished. Complete silence returned. Until, crunch, a piece of coal fell from the ceiling. Then another. Then dozens. Dust drifted through the tunnel. The ground vibrated beneath everyone's feet. Daniel remembered Elias's words. The mountain wasn't built. It grew. Like a shell. His blood turned cold. Suddenly every emergency alarm inside the mine activated. Red warning lights flashed. Sirens echoed endlessly through the tunnels. The computer monitoring the mine displayed the same message on every screen. Unknown seismic movement detected. One engineer shouted, "It's not an earthquake." The vibration was too regular. Too controlled. Like breathing. Then came another sound. A slow, deep heartbeat. Thump. The entire tunnel shook. Thump. Dust poured from the ceiling. Thump. Steel beams groaned under impossible pressure. The mountain had a pulse. Panic spread instantly. Everybody to the elevators. Miners abandoned their equipment and sprinted through the tunnels. Some fell. Others screamed. The heartbeat continued. Slow. Patient. Growing stronger. Daniel followed the others until he noticed someone missing. Dr. Carter. She remained standing near the opening, staring into the darkness. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she whispered, "It's looking back." Daniel froze. "What?" She slowly pointed into the chamber. Far away, beyond the ruined city, two enormous circles had appeared inside the darkness. At first they resembled distant lights. Then they blinked. Eyes. Impossible eyes. Larger than houses. Watching the tiny human standing at the entrance of its ancient prison. Neither angry, nor curious. Simply awake. The heartbeat stopped. Everything became silent once again. Then one colossal eye slowly narrowed. Almost like a smile. The whispers returned. This time every person heard the exact same sentence. Not inside their ears. Inside their minds. "You finally opened the door." Several miners collapsed instantly. Others screamed uncontrollably. One man laughed hysterically before running directly into the darkness. Daniel reached for him. Too late. The man disappeared between the ancient stone buildings. His flashlight bounced once across the ground. Then vanished. A single scream echoed across the underground city. It ended abruptly. Silence followed. No footsteps returned. The survivors fled toward the elevators. Nobody looked back. Nobody wanted to. The heartbeat resumed behind them. Slower now. Satisfied. As though whatever slept beneath Black Mountain had stretched after an unimaginably long sleep. When the final elevator reached the surface, every miner stumbled into the cold evening air. No one celebrated. No one spoke. They simply stared at Black Mountain. The peak looked exactly the same as it always had. Silent. Majestic. Unmoving. Yet Daniel couldn't shake the horrifying truth now buried inside his mind. The mountain wasn't covering the city. The city wasn't buried beneath the mountain. Both of them were trapped inside something far older than either one. And somewhere beneath miles of living stone, countless invisible fingers began tapping once more. Not calling. Not warning. Counting. 1, 2, 3, as though patiently measuring the moments until the prison opened completely. The next morning, Black Mountain looked perfectly ordinary. Sunlight spilled across the pine-covered slopes. Birds sang in the trees. A cool breeze drifted through the valley, carrying the familiar scent of damp earth and wild cedar. To anyone passing through, it was just another peaceful Appalachian morning. But the men who had escaped Shaft 12 knew better. They had seen the impossible. And the impossible had seen them. By 8 o'clock, black SUVs rolled into the mining camp. None of them carried company logos. Men in dark suits stepped out, accompanied by armed security guards wearing no identification. Without introducing themselves, they entered the administration building. Half an hour later, every surviving miner was ordered inside. Daniel sat near the back of the room. Across from him stood a tall man with silver hair and a calm expression that never once changed. "My name is Richard Hale," he began. "I'm here on behalf of the company." His voice was smooth, practiced, emotionless. What happened yesterday was the result of an unstable geological formation. No one responded. Hale continued. "The mine is permanently closed." Several miners nodded in relief. Then Hale added, "You will all receive generous compensation." A brief pause. "In return, you will sign non-disclosure agreements." Silence. "If anyone discusses yesterday's events publicly," he smiled politely, "the company will pursue legal action." One miner slammed his fist against the table. "Legal action? We almost died." Another stood. "There was something down there." Hale didn't blink. There was nothing. Daniel stared at him. This man wasn't denying the truth because he didn't believe it. He was denying it because he already knew. The meeting ended abruptly. As the miners filed out, Hale quietly stopped Daniel. Mr. Mercer. Daniel turned. I'd like a word. Inside Hale's office, the executive poured 2 cups of coffee. Neither man touched them. You've worked in mines for many years. Daniel nodded. You've seen accidents. Yes. You've seen hallucinations caused by stress. I know the difference. Hale smiled faintly. I was afraid you'd say that. He opened a leather briefcase and removed an old black and white photograph. Daniel immediately recognized it. The group photo from 1938. Except, this copy hadn't been damaged. The 32nd miner remained visible. Daniel looked closer. His blood ran cold. The man looked exactly like him. Not similar. Identical. Same eyes. Same jawline. Same scar above the eyebrow. The photograph had been taken almost 90 years earlier. It should have been impossible. Daniel slowly looked up. Who is he? Hale answered immediately. Your grandfather. Daniel frowned. My grandfather died in Ohio. No. Hale folded his hands. That's what your family was told. The room suddenly felt smaller. My father never knew the truth. Daniel's mouth went dry. What truth? Hale leaned forward. Your grandfather never left Black Mountain. For several long seconds, Daniel couldn't speak. My grandmother buried him. No. We sent her an empty coffin. Daniel stared in disbelief. Why? Because the alternative was far worse. Hale slid another folder across the desk. Inside were dozens of classified reports dating back nearly a century. The earliest file bore the year 1891. The first report described the disappearance of 6 miners. The second documented strange knocking sounds. The third mentioned voices coming from solid rock. Page after page revealed the same horrifying pattern. Every 20 to 30 years, someone opened the eastern tunnels. People disappeared. The mine was sealed. History repeated itself. Again. And again. And again. Daniel flipped through photographs. Every generation showed the same symbols carved into stone. The same barefoot footprints. The same enormous underground chamber. The same city. One photograph stopped him cold. Taken in 1964. It showed a rescue team standing inside the ancient city. Behind them, barely visible between the towering columns, stood dozens of human figures. Watching. Perfectly still. The report beneath the picture read. None of the figures were present when the photograph was taken. Daniel closed the folder. You've known about this for over a century. Hale nodded. Longer. Then why keep mining here? The executive sighed. Because every time we stop. He looked toward the mountain. The knocking begins again. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? It wants attention. If people abandon the mountain completely. Hale's expression hardened. It starts calling the towns instead. Daniel remembered Emily's nightmare. The voice beneath her bed. They knew your name. His stomach tightened. How many people know about this? Hale answered quietly. Fewer every decade. Why? Because knowing. He paused. Makes you easier to find. That afternoon Daniel drove straight to Elias's cabin. The old miner was gone. The small wooden house stood empty. Furniture remained untouched. The fireplace still contained warm ashes. His dinner sat on the table. Half-eaten. As though he had simply walked outside. And never returned. Daniel searched every room. Nothing. Until he noticed loose floorboards beneath Elias's bed. Hidden underneath lay a heavy iron box. Inside rested dozens of silver coins. Each engraved with unfamiliar symbols. Beneath them sat another leather journal. Its first page contained only one sentence. If you are reading this, they have already started following you. Daniel carried the journal outside. The afternoon sun had begun sinking behind Black Mountain. He sat on Elias's porch and opened the first page. The entries stretched back nearly 50 years. Unlike Margaret's father's journal, these were far more detailed. May 3, 1978. I finally understand what the knockers are. Daniel leaned closer. They are not the creatures beneath the mountain. They are prisoners. His heartbeat quickened. They knock because they are trying to warn us. Daniel froze. Every story, every legend, every rumor, had been wrong. The knockers weren't inviting miners underground. They were begging them not to come. He turned the page. June 11, 1978. The voices are not theirs. Something deeper copies human voices. It learns from us. It studies grief. It speaks with the voices we miss most. Daniel remembered hearing Emily. The miner hearing his dead mother. Another hearing his wife. It hadn't been ghosts. It had been imitation. Another page. July 2, 1978. Never answer. Never knock back. Never follow the voices. Because every conversation teaches it how to become human. Daniel slowly lowered the journal. A cold wind swept across the valley. The mountain disappeared behind gathering storm clouds. His phone suddenly rang. Claire. Daniel answered immediately. Claire? Her voice shook. Emily's gone. His heart stopped. What? I woke up. Claire was crying. Her bedroom window was open. Daniel jumped to his feet. What happened? The neighbors found footprints. What kind? Claire whispered through terrified sobs. They're too small to be mine. Daniel's blood turned to ice. Where do they lead? A long silence. Then, toward the woods. Without another word, Daniel sprinted to his truck. As he drove out of the mining camp, the sun disappeared completely behind Black Mountain. The first drops of rain struck the windshield. Thunder rolled across the valley. Then, from somewhere inside the forest, he heard it. Even over the sound of the engine. Even through the pounding rain. 3 slow, gentle knocks. Knock, knock, knock. This time, they weren't coming from beneath the mountain. They were coming from the trees. As if whatever had awakened below Black Mountain no longer needed to remain underground. Daniel drove faster than he ever had in his life. Rain hammered against the windshield with such force that the road vanished every few seconds beneath sheets of water. Lightning flashed across the Appalachian sky, briefly illuminating endless walls of pine trees on either side of the highway. Every shadow looked alive. Every mile felt too long. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Her frightened voice. They knew your name. The barefoot footprints. The whispers beneath the mountain. And now, whatever had been trapped below Black Mountain no longer seemed confined to the tunnels. It was moving. 3 hours later, Daniel's truck screeched to a stop outside his home. Police cruisers lined the street. Neighbors stood silently beneath umbrellas, whispering among themselves. The front yard had been sealed with yellow tape. Claire rushed into Daniel's arms before he even reached the porch. They still haven't found her. Daniel held her tightly. Tell me everything. Claire struggled to steady her breathing. I checked on her around midnight. She was asleep? Claire nodded. At least? I thought she was. What happened? I woke up because I heard knocking. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Where? Under the house. She looked toward the dark crawlspace beneath the porch. 3 knocks. Slow. Like someone politely asking to come inside. Daniel followed Detective Samuel Brooks toward Emily's bedroom. The window stood wide open despite the rain. Mud covered the wooden floor. Small footprints led from the bed. Across the room. Through the window? And into the backyard. The detective crouched beside them. They're strange. Daniel looked down. The prints resembled a child's. But each footprint had only 4 toes. No heel. Just long, narrow impressions pressed deep into the mud. As though whatever walked there had never learned how humans moved. Search teams had already combed the surrounding woods. Nothing. No torn clothing. No signs of struggle. No blood. No screams reported by neighbors. It was as though Emily had simply walked away willingly. An elderly woman from across the street quietly approached Daniel. I saw her. Everyone turned toward her. When? A little after midnight. What did you see? The old woman pointed toward the tree line. Emily was holding someone's hand. Daniel's heart pounded. Who? She frowned. I couldn't see clearly. Was it a man? No. A woman? She slowly shook her head. It was too tall. The detective sighed. Probably a kidnapper. The old woman immediately disagreed. It wasn't walking. What do you mean? She looked terrified. I mean, it wasn't touching the ground. The search continued until dawn. Helicopters scanned the forest. Tracking dogs followed Emily's scent for nearly 2 miles. Then, every dog stopped. None would move another step. Handlers pulled their leashes. The dogs whimpered. Some tried to run back toward the road. Others buried their noses beneath fallen leaves as though trying to hide. The lead handler looked confused. "I've never seen this." Daniel knew why. The scent hadn't disappeared. It had gone somewhere the dogs refused to follow. Hidden among the wet leaves, Daniel noticed something glimmering. He knelt. A silver coin. One of Elias's coins. Fresh mud clung to its edges. Someone had left it there deliberately. Wrapped around the coin was a folded piece of paper. Only 3 words had been written. "Don't follow her." Daniel immediately recognized the handwriting. Elias. That made no sense. Elias had disappeared 2 days earlier. Unless he hadn't. Ignoring the police, Daniel followed the direction of the footprints alone. The deeper he entered the forest, the quieter everything became. No birds. No insects. No wind. Only rain. Even that eventually stopped. Yet the trees remained soaked. Daniel frowned. The silence felt unnatural. Almost intentional. Another flash of lightning illuminated the woods. For less than a second, he saw dozens of people standing between the trees. Perfectly still. Watching him. Men. Women. Children. Covered in coal dust. Before he could react, darkness returned. His flashlight swept across the forest. Nothing. Only empty trees. Daniel slowly lowered the light. Then, one voice whispered behind him. "Daddy." "Emily." He spun around. No one. Again. "Daddy." Closer now. The voice came from somewhere beyond a thick wall of pine trees. Daniel took a cautious step forward. Another. Then another. The forest seemed to change around him. Trees that had stood several feet apart moments earlier now crowded tightly together. The path behind him vanished beneath tangled roots. Every direction looked the same. He realized he was lost. The whispers multiplied. Emily laughed somewhere ahead. Then behind him. Then high above in the branches. Then beneath his feet. Her voice came from everywhere. "Daddy. I'm over here." "No. Here." Daniel covered his ears. It didn't help. The voices weren't outside. They echoed inside his mind. Suddenly. Knock. Daniel froze. A tree directly beside him vibrated gently. Knock. Another tree answered farther away. Knock. Another. Within seconds, every tree in the forest began knocking. Thousands of trunks. Thousands of slow rhythmic taps. The entire forest echoed like an endless cathedral filled with invisible hands. Daniel backed away. The knocking stopped instantly. Then, every tree leaned. Only slightly. Toward him. His flashlight beam landed on fresh carvings in the bark. Not random scratches. Words. The first tree read, "Turn back." The second, "It is watching." The third, "We failed." The fourth made Daniel's blood freeze. It simply read, "Daniel." He stumbled backward. The carving looked old. Very old. Covered by decades of bark growth. Someone had carved his name long before he had been born. A familiar voice interrupted the silence. "Don't read them." Daniel turned. Standing beneath the trees was Elias. Or someone who looked exactly like Elias. His clothes were torn. His beard hung longer than before. His skin appeared pale beneath layers of coal dust. Most disturbing of all, he hadn't aged. Not even slightly. "Elias?" The old miner slowly raised one hand. "Don't come closer." Daniel ignored him. "We've been looking everywhere." "I know. Emily's missing." "I know. You have to help me." Elias closed his eyes. "They've already started teaching her." Daniel felt his knees weaken. "What are you talking about?" "The language." "What language?" "The one beneath the mountain." Daniel stepped closer. "Elias." The old miner looked exhausted. "I disappeared once before." Daniel frowned. "What?" "In 1978. Daniel stared. "But they found me 3 days later." "I remember." "They thought." His voice cracked. "But 3 days underground." He looked toward Black Mountain. "Were 48 years for me." Daniel stopped breathing. The city doesn't obey our time. It never has. I escaped. But. He slowly looked into Daniel's eyes. I wasn't alone when I came back. A long silence followed. Then Elias whispered the words Daniel feared most. It came back with me. The wind suddenly returned. Violently. Branches snapped overhead. Leaves swirled across the forest floor. Daniel looked away for only a second. When he turned back, Elias was gone. Only another silver coin remained where he had been standing. Daniel picked it up. On one side, the familiar strange symbols gleamed beneath the rain. On the other, a sentence had been freshly carved. It is learning to wear US. At that exact moment, somewhere deep inside the forest, a little girl began laughing. It sounded exactly like Emily. Except, there was something impossibly ancient hiding beneath the laughter. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Daniel realized the most terrifying possibility of all. Perhaps Emily wasn't being hunted. Perhaps she had been chosen. Emily's laughter echoed through the trees. It drifted between the towering pines, sometimes sounding only a few feet away, then impossibly distant the next moment. Every time Daniel rushed toward it, the sound slipped away, leading him deeper into the forest. The old stories suddenly made sense. The mountain didn't chase its victims. It let them follow willingly. Daniel forced himself to stop. He closed his eyes and took a slow breath. That's not Emily, he whispered. The laughter stopped immediately. For several seconds, the forest remained perfectly silent. Then another voice answered. Not Emily's. A boy's. No. It isn't. Daniel's eyes opened. Standing 20 yards away was a child wearing faded mining overalls. He looked no older than 10. Coal dust covered his face, and an old brass lantern hung from one small hand. The boy smiled sadly. You finally listened. Daniel stepped forward carefully. Who are you? My name is Thomas. The name stirred something inside Daniel's memory. Then he remembered. The journal from 1938. Tom. The miner who had answered the knocking. But this was only a child. Daniel frowned. Where are your parents? Thomas looked confused. I don't remember. How old are you? I think. The boy paused, searching for the answer. 10. When were you born? Thomas stared blankly into the trees. I don't remember that either. Daniel slowly realized the horrifying truth. The child remembered his name. But nothing else. You shouldn't be here, Thomas said quietly. They'll see you. Who? The sleeper. Daniel felt the cold return. The thing beneath the mountain? Thomas shook his head. No. The mountain is beneath him. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. What does that mean? Instead of answering, Thomas lifted his lantern. Its flame burned blue instead of orange. Come. We don't have much time. The boy led Daniel through parts of the forest that seemed untouched by human hands. Massive trees rose like pillars, their trunks wider than houses. Strange black moss covered the ground, muffling every footstep. Eventually they reached a narrow cliff hidden behind thick vines. Thomas gently pulled the vines aside. Behind them stood an enormous stone doorway. Daniel stared in disbelief. It was covered in the same symbols he had seen beneath Black Mountain. But one thing was different. The doorway had never been carved. It had grown. The black stone twisted like frozen muscle. Veins spread through it like roots beneath skin. The doorway looked alive. Thomas placed one tiny hand against the stone. 3 gentle knocks echoed from the other side. Knock. 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 A deep rumble answered. The doorway slowly opened inward. Warm air flowed from the darkness. It smelled strangely familiar. Not earth. Not coal. Breath. Daniel hesitated. Thomas looked back. You have to see. What? The truth. Beyond the doorway stretched a narrow tunnel illuminated by glowing crystals embedded inside the walls. Unlike the mining tunnels, this passage curved smoothly. No tool marks. No broken rock. It looked less like a tunnel, and more like the inside of a giant artery. Daniel fought the urge to turn back. Every instinct screamed that he was walking somewhere humans had never been meant to enter. Yet he continued. Because somewhere ahead, Emily was waiting. After nearly 20 minutes, the tunnel widened into another vast chamber. Daniel's flashlight slowly swept across the darkness. His breathing stopped. Children. Hundreds of them. Perhaps thousands. They wandered quietly through the ancient city beneath Black Mountain. Some wore clothing from the early 1900s. Others dressed in styles from the 1950s. The 1980s. The present day. Boys. Girls. Every age. None older than 12. None appeared frightened. None spoke. They simply walked the empty streets with peaceful expressions. As though sleepwalking. One little girl sat alone beside an ancient fountain. She gently rolled a wooden hoop across the stone pavement. Daniel noticed something strange. The toy was rotten with age. Yet she remained exactly the same. She couldn't have been older than 8. Thomas whispered, "They don't grow here." Daniel looked around in horror. "How long have they been here?" Thomas answered softly. "Some. For hundreds of years." Daniel's stomach tightened. "They're dead?" Thomas slowly shook his head. "No. Worse." Farther into the city, Daniel recognized something that made his blood freeze. Emily. She sat beside another group of children beneath a massive stone archway. Her clothes were muddy. Her hair was damp from the rain. But she looked calm. Happy, even. She was drawing strange symbols across the pavement with a piece of black coal. "Emily." Daniel ran toward her. She slowly looked up. Smiled. "Hi, Daddy." Daniel dropped to his knees and wrapped her tightly in his arms. "I've got you. We're going home." Emily didn't hug him back. Instead, she looked past him. "They're coming." Daniel turned. The other children had stopped moving. Every single one stared toward the far end of the city. The silence became suffocating. Thomas whispered one word. "Listen." At first Daniel heard nothing. Then, very faintly, knock, knock, knock. Only 3 taps. But this time, the children answered. One by one. Each child gently knocked against the nearest wall. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, thousands of tiny hands tapped softly against the black stone surrounding the city. Knock, knock, knock. The rhythm spread like a prayer. Like a warning. Not a greeting. A warning. Daniel finally understood. The knockers were never spirits. They were the lost. The trapped. The children. The minors. Every soul that had disappeared beneath Black Mountain. Still knocking. Still trying to warn anyone who entered. Thomas looked toward the darkness beyond the city. "They're afraid." "Who?" "The children." "Of what?" Thomas didn't answer. He simply pointed upward. Daniel followed his finger. High above the city ceiling. Something moved. At first it resembled clouds drifting across darkness. Then lightning flashed through cracks in the cavern roof. For one brief second, Daniel saw it clearly. An enormous human face. Embedded inside the living stone. Its eyes remained closed. Its mouth stretched across nearly half the cavern. As though an unimaginably large body had become fused with the mountain itself. Daniel's legs nearly gave out. "What?" Thomas interrupted quietly. "Don't look for too long." "Why?" "Because." His voice trembled. "It starts remembering your face." A low vibration rolled through the city. The giant stone face slowly inhaled. Every child stopped knocking. The silence that followed felt endless. Then, 2 colossal eyes opened. Dark. Bottomless. Ancient beyond comprehension. They stared directly at Daniel. Not at the city. Not at the children. At him. Emily gently squeezed his hand. "Daddy. We have to hide." "Why?" She looked terrified for the first time since he had found her. "Because. It knows your family." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "What do you mean?" Emily slowly looked into the darkness. "It says? Your grandfather promised to come back." The giant face smiled. And the entire city began to shake. The smile spread slowly across the colossal face. It wasn't a human smile. It was too wide. Too patient. Too ancient. The black stone stretched without cracking, revealing a darkness inside its mouth deeper than the night sky itself. There were no teeth. No tongue. Only an endless abyss. The entire underground city trembled as though every building, every bridge, and every towering pillar had become part of the same living body. Daniel instinctively pulled Emily behind him. Every protective instinct in his body screamed to run. But there was nowhere to run. The city had become a cage. The children did not scream. They did not cry. Instead, they quietly knelt. Thousands of them. Each placing one hand against the stone beneath their feet. Thomas did the same. Emily hesitated. Then slowly copied the others. Daniel grabbed her wrist. No. Emily looked at him with frightened eyes. If I don't, it will hear me. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. It already has. A low voice rolled across the city. Not through the air. Through the stone itself. Every wall vibrated with each word. Every bridge echoed. Every pillar whispered. Blood. The single word seemed to last forever. Then, you returned? Daniel recognized the voice immediately. It was the same voice that had spoken through Emily's bedroom. The same voice that had whispered inside the mine. The same voice that had learned to imitate the people its victims loved. Except now, it no longer needed to imitate anyone. This was its true voice. Ancient. Immense. Almost impossible for a human mind to understand. Daniel slowly stepped backward. What are you? Silence. Then the mountain answered. Forgotten. Another pause. Buried. The city shook again. Hungry. Thomas whispered without lifting his head. Don't ask questions. It likes talking. Daniel frowned. Why? Every answer. Thomas swallowed. Helps it remember. The giant eyes remained fixed upon Daniel. Not blinking. Not moving. Simply watching. Then, a memory appeared inside Daniel's mind. Not his own. Someone else's. He stood in the same underground city. But it wasn't abandoned. Thousands of enormous beings walked its streets. Their bodies resembled humans, yet each stood over 20 feet tall. Their skin looked like polished obsidian. Their eyes glowed faintly beneath the dim light of strange stars that hung above the cavern ceiling. Children laughed. Rivers flowed. Music echoed between impossible towers. The city was alive. Peaceful. Beautiful. Then, the ground began to shake. The towering beings looked upward. Something unimaginably vast descended from the darkness above. A shadow so enormous it swallowed the entire city. People screamed. Buildings collapsed. The earth folded inward. Everything vanished beneath an avalanche of black stone. The vision ended. Daniel collapsed onto one knee, gasping for air. Thomas quietly spoke. It shows everyone. What? The day it fell. It wants us to feel sorry for it. Daniel looked toward the giant face. You mean? Thomas nodded. It lies. Another voice interrupted. Not the ancient creature. An elderly man. Thomas is right. Daniel turned. An old miner slowly emerged from the shadows between the towering columns. His beard reached nearly to his waist. His lantern emitted the same strange blue flame. He looked familiar. Painfully familiar. The photograph. The missing 32nd miner. Daniel's grandfather. For several long moments neither man spoke. Finally, the old miner smiled sadly. You've grown. Daniel felt tears forming. This, his voice cracked, is impossible. So is everything down here. Daniel stepped closer. My father believed you were dead. I know. My grandmother waited for you. I know. Why didn't you come home? The old man's expression shattered. I tried. He slowly lifted one trembling hand. It passed through a stone pillar. Like smoke. Daniel froze. His grandfather wasn't alive. But he wasn't dead either. What happened to you? The old miner looked toward the giant face above the city. I answered the knocking. Silence. I believed I could save the others. Another pause. Instead, I opened the first door. Daniel remembered the journal. He answered the knocking first. The company blamed the explosion. His grandfather shook his head. There was no explosion. They buried the truth. What truth? The old man slowly pointed toward the gigantic face fused into the mountain. We cracked the prison. Daniel's breathing became shallow. Prison? It wasn't buried here by accident. Who buried it? The old miner's eyes filled with sorrow. The people whose city this once was. Daniel looked around. The giants? His grandfather nodded. They sacrificed themselves. They became the walls. They became the mountain. They became the prison. Another earthquake shook the cavern. Massive cracks spread across distant towers. Dust drifted endlessly from above. The giant face slowly opened its eyes wider. Its smile deepened. Thomas whispered, "It's getting stronger." Daniel turned back toward his grandfather. "What does it want?" The answer came before the old miner could speak. The ancient voice thundered across the city. "Freedom." The single word echoed endlessly. "Freedom. Freedom. Freedom." Every stone repeated it. Every bridge whispered it. Even the children unconsciously mouthed the word. Daniel looked down at Emily. She stared blankly toward the creature. "It's inside my dreams," she whispered. "It says? I can help open the last door." Daniel grabbed her shoulders. "What door?" Emily slowly pointed toward his chest. "You." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" His grandfather's face filled with horror. "No." The old miner looked directly into Daniel's eyes. It finally found the bloodline. Daniel felt ice spreading through his veins. "What bloodline?" "The one that opened the prison." The old miner reached inside his faded jacket and removed an ancient leather pouch. Inside rested a single object. A black stone key. Unlike any key Daniel had ever seen. It looked carved from the same living rock as the mountain itself. His grandfather pressed it into Daniel's hand. "It belongs to our family." Daniel stared at it. "What does it unlock?" The old miner closed his eyes. "The last seal." Thomas suddenly screamed. "Look!" Everyone turned upward. The giant face had begun pulling itself free from the cavern wall. Not quickly. Slowly. Painfully. Miles of black stone stretched and cracked around it. Entire mountains groaned overhead. Somewhere far above, trees toppled across the forests of Appalachia. Roads split open. Windows shattered in distant towns. The awakening had begun. The ancient voice spoke once more. This time, not to everyone. Only to Daniel. "Bring me the key." A long pause followed. Then the creature whispered the words that froze every drop of blood in his body. "Grandson." The stone key suddenly grew warm in Daniel's trembling hand. Tiny cracks appeared across its surface. And from somewhere deep inside the black stone, 3 slow knocks answered. Knock. 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 As if something trapped within the key itself wanted to get out. The black stone key pulsed in Daniel's hand. Not with heat. With a heartbeat. Slow. Heavy. Ancient. Each pulse traveled through his fingers, up his arm, and settled somewhere deep inside his chest until, for one terrifying moment, Daniel could no longer tell whether the rhythm belonged to the key or to his own heart. The 3 knocks echoed again. Knock. 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 This time, every child in the city lifted their heads at once. Their eyes locked onto the key. Not with hope. With fear. Thomas took an instinctive step backward. "You shouldn't hold it." Daniel looked at him. "Why?" Thomas swallowed hard. "It remembers its keeper." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" Before Thomas could answer, the key shifted. Ever so slightly. Like a living creature adjusting itself inside Daniel's palm. His fingers instinctively loosened. The key didn't fall. Instead, tiny black tendrils spread from its surface, wrapping gently around his skin. Almost affectionately. Almost. Like it recognized him. The ancient voice rolled through the cavern once more. Not as thunder. As a whisper spoken directly behind Daniel's ear. Blood recognizes blood. Daniel spun around. No one stood behind him. Yet he could still feel warm breath against the back of his neck. His grandfather suddenly grabbed Daniel's wrist. "Don't listen." The old miner's transparent hand passed through the tendrils. His expression darkened. "It's bonding." "What?" "The key." His grandfather stared in horror. "It hasn't accepted anyone for nearly a century." Another violent tremor shook the underground city. Far above, massive chunks of black stone broke away from the ceiling and crashed into abandoned streets. One of the ancient towers collapsed with a deafening roar, sending clouds of black dust rolling through the cavern. Yet none of the children panicked. They simply watched. As if they had seen this happen many times before. Emily quietly tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy." He looked down. She pointed toward the sky above the city. "The stars are disappearing." Daniel followed her finger. Only then did he realize that the tiny lights embedded high above the cavern ceiling weren't stars at all. They were cracks. Tiny openings through which daylight had once reached this hidden world. Now, one by one, those cracks were closing. As though the prison itself was sealing from the outside. Or preparing to hatch. His grandfather noticed Daniel staring upward. It knows. What? That we're trying to stop it. Daniel tightened his grip on the key. How? The old miner looked around the city. It hears everything inside the mountain. Every whisper. Every heartbeat. Every prayer. Every lie. It has listened for thousands of years. Thomas suddenly ran toward a nearby stone monument. Come! Daniel, Emily, and the old miner followed. The monument stood in the center of an ancient plaza, nearly hidden beneath layers of coal dust. At first glance it resembled an ordinary obelisk. Then Daniel noticed the carvings. They weren't decorations. They were names. Thousands upon thousands of names. Children. Miners. Hunters. Travelers. Entire families. Generations of people who had vanished around Black Mountain. Daniel slowly traced one of the oldest inscriptions. The stone felt warm. Almost alive. What is this place? Thomas answered quietly. The Remembering Stone. Daniel looked confused. Remembering what? Thomas shook his head. No. It remembers us. He gently placed his small hand against the monument. Instantly, hundreds of faint voices echoed from inside the stone. Not screams. Not cries. Memories. Laughter. Birthday songs. Wedding vows. Children playing. Parents calling their sons home for dinner. Tiny fragments of thousands of forgotten lives. Daniel realized the horrifying truth. The monument wasn't carved with names. It contained them. Every person taken by the mountain still existed here. As memories trapped inside living stone. His grandfather spoke softly. It doesn't eat bodies. Daniel looked toward him. It eats time. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? When people disappear. The old miner touched the monument. They're slowly forgotten. He pointed toward Thomas. Ask him about his parents. Daniel turned. Thomas looked down. I don't remember them. Your birthday? No. Your home? Thomas's face remained empty. No. The old miner sighed. The longer someone remains here, the more the world above forgets they ever existed. Daniel felt sick. So my father? He slowly forgot me. His grandfather nodded. And his father before him. The realization struck Daniel like a hammer. That was why records had been erased. Why photographs disappeared. Why missing people became unsolved mysteries. The creature wasn't only consuming lives. It was consuming memory itself. Another enormous crack ripped across the cavern ceiling. This time, daylight poured through. Real daylight. Bright. Golden. The ancient face immediately recoiled from it. A deep, agonizing roar shook the city. The sound wasn't anger. It was pain. The sunlight burned it. Thomas looked toward the opening. We still have time. Daniel stared upward. Time for what? His grandfather slowly pointed toward the black stone key. To lock the prison again. Daniel looked at the key. How? The old miner's expression fell. Someone has to become the new seal. Silence. Daniel already knew the answer. Me. His grandfather couldn't bring himself to say the word. But he nodded. Emily suddenly clung tightly to her father. No. Tears filled her eyes. I'm not leaving you. Daniel knelt beside her. You won't. We'll go home together. Emily shook her head violently. It showed me. What? The ending. Daniel froze. What ending? Emily looked toward the enormous face now struggling against the mountain. It says? Only one Mercer can leave. The city shook harder than ever before. Entire bridges collapsed into endless darkness below. The ancient voice no longer whispered. It roared. The key belongs to me. The sound shattered windows in distant towns above. Miles away, people looked toward Black Mountain as its summit split open with a thunderous crack. Smoke and black dust billowed into the sky. For the first time in recorded history, the mountain itself was breaking apart. The black stone key suddenly slipped from Daniel's hand. It floated. Suspended in the air. The tendrils wrapped around it like twisting veins. Then it began drifting. Toward the giant face. Slowly. Relentlessly. As if pulled by an invisible force. Daniel lunged forward and caught it just before it disappeared into the darkness. The instant his fingers closed around it, the key cracked completely open. Inside, something moved. Not a mechanism. Not another key. A tiny figure. No larger than a child's hand. It was made entirely of silver light. The little being looked up at Daniel with exhausted eyes. Then, for the very first time since this nightmare began, one of the true knockers spoke. Not with fear. Not with warning. But with hope. "We're almost free." The tiny creature gently touched Daniel's forehead. A flood of forgotten memories erupted through his mind. He finally saw the truth about the knockers. And he realized. Everything humanity believed about Black Mountain had been only half the story. The real horror had never been what was trapped beneath the mountain. It was who had been forced to guard it. The tiny figure of silver light rested in Daniel's trembling hand. For the first time since entering Black Mountain, the endless knocking ceased. The silence that followed felt sacred. The little being looked no older than a child, yet its eyes carried the exhaustion of countless centuries. "We are the knockers," it whispered. "We were never trying to lure anyone here." Daniel stared at the glowing figure. "Then why knock?" The creature lowered its head. "Because every prison needs guards." Its voice was barely louder than a breath. "And every guard eventually becomes a prisoner." The words settled over the ancient city like falling snow. Around them, the thousands of lost children slowly raised their heads. The coal dust covering their faces began drifting away, revealing ordinary children from every generation, some dressed in clothes from the 18th century, others from the modern day. They had never been monsters. They had only been forgotten. The silver being continued. "Long before mankind walked these mountains, this valley belonged to another civilization." Daniel remembered the vision. The towering black stone people. They discovered a creature that fed on memory. The glowing figure nodded. It could not be killed. It could not be starved. It could only be imprisoned. So they sacrificed themselves. Daniel slowly looked around the city. They became the mountain. They became the walls. And we? The little being smiled sadly. Became the locks. Daniel finally understood. Every mysterious knock heard by generations of miners. Every warning passed down through Appalachian folklore. Every unexplained disappearance. The knockers had never been inviting people underground. They had been desperately trying to keep humanity away from the final seal. The true monster had listened. It had copied their warnings. It had imitated their voices. It had turned their desperate pleas into irresistible invitations. Everything had been part of its escape. A violent tremor shook the city. The colossal face pulled farther from the cavern wall. Miles of black stone split apart with deafening cracks. Above the mountain, the sky darkened unnaturally. Clouds twisted into a massive spiral. Lightning struck the summit again and again. Far below, emergency sirens echoed through every nearby town as people fled collapsing roads and falling trees. Black Mountain was dying. The prison could not survive much longer. The silver being looked directly into Daniel's eyes. "There is only one way." Daniel already knew. "Someone must take your place." The creature nodded. "A guardian must willingly bind their memory to the prison." Daniel looked toward Emily. She stood silently beside Thomas, tears streaming down her face. "No." She shook her head. "You promised we'd go home." Daniel walked toward her and gently knelt. "I know. You can't leave me. I don't want to." "You don't have to." Daniel smiled through his tears. "Sometimes, the hardest promises to keep are the ones that save the people we love." Emily threw her arms around him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel removed the old silver coin Elias had given him on the very first day. He placed it gently into Emily's hand. "Keep this." "What is it for?" "So you'll remember." Emily cried harder. "I'll never forget you." Daniel closed his eyes. "I hope that's true." His grandfather stepped forward. "I should do it." Daniel looked at the old miner. "You've already sacrificed enough. I'm already trapped. You still deserve peace." The old man lowered his head. For the first time in nearly 90 years. He smiled. "I'm proud of you." Daniel walked alone toward the center of the city. The black stone key floated from his hand and settled into a circular altar surrounded by ancient symbols. As soon as it touched the stone, the entire city began glowing. The silver knockers gathered around him. Thousands of tiny lights rose into the air like stars returning to the heavens. The ancient creature roared. Its enormous arms finally tore free from the mountain. The ground split open. Entire towers collapsed. The prison had only moments left. Daniel placed both hands upon the altar. The symbols ignited beneath his fingertips. The silver beings began singing. It wasn't a human language. It wasn't a song anyone living could understand. It sounded like stone remembering its own birth. The ancient voice screamed. "You belong to me." Daniel opened his eyes. "No." His voice echoed across the entire mountain. "I belong to them." The key shattered into thousands of fragments of silver light. Every fragment flew into the sky above the city. One by one, the spirits of the knockers dissolved into the glowing storm. Their prison, their burden, their endless watch, had finally ended. The light gathered around Daniel. His memories began slipping away. His first birthday. His father's smile. Claire. Emily. Each memory became another stone in the rebuilding prison. The creature fought desperately. Black tendrils lashed across the city. The mountain shook with unimaginable force. Then, silence. A single brilliant flash erupted beneath Black Mountain. The light pierced every crack in the earth before disappearing as suddenly as it had come. The roar ended. The shaking stopped. The storm vanished. The mountain stood still. Completely still. For the first time in thousands of years. There was no knocking. Weeks later, the rescue team searched every tunnel beneath Black Mountain. They found no underground city. No ancient statues. No impossible caverns. Only collapsed mines. Official reports blamed a rare seismic event. The company permanently abandoned the mountain. The entrances were sealed forever. Most people accepted the explanation. Most. Claire and Emily moved away the following spring. They started a new life hundreds of miles from Appalachia. Emily never again heard knocking beneath her bed. Years passed. She grew older. Finished school. Started a family of her own. Yet every birthday, she placed an old silver coin on the windowsill before going to sleep. She never knew why. It simply felt important. One autumn evening, decades later, Emily returned to Black Mountain with her young son. The forests had reclaimed the abandoned roads. Nature had hidden nearly every trace of the old mine. The mountain looked peaceful. As the sun disappeared behind the peaks, her son stopped walking. "Mom? What is it?" He pointed toward the distant summit. "I think someone's standing up there." Emily looked. At first she saw nothing. Then, a lone silhouette appeared against the fading sky. A man wearing an old miner's helmet. Watching quietly from the highest ridge. The distance was too great to recognize his face. But somehow, she knew. A warm breeze drifted through the valley. 3 gentle knocks echoed from somewhere deep beneath the earth. Not frightening. Not inviting. Protective. The boy looked at his mother. "What was that?" Emily smiled softly. "Someone." She took her son's hand. "Making sure we stay safe." When she looked back toward the summit, the figure was gone. Deep beneath Black Mountain, sealed beyond memory and time, an ancient prison slept once more. And somewhere within its endless darkness, a lone guardian listened. Waiting. Not for someone to answer the knocking, but to make certain no one ever had to again. The end.